The Forgotten Palace. In a remote corner of the countryside, hidden away from prying eyes and forgotten by time, stood the grand but crumbling Drakenhof Palace. Built centuries ago by the enigmatic Duke Friedrich von Drakenhof, the palace was once a symbol of opulence and power. Its towering spires and intricate stonework spoke of a time when the Drakenhof family ruled the land with an iron fist. However, dark rumors surrounded the palace. Whispers of unspeakable acts committed within its walls, of tormented souls trapped in an eternal nightmare. Chapter 1. The Arrival. One misty autumn morning, a historian named Jonathan Harker arrived in the nearby village of Drakenhof. Driven by a passion for uncovering hidden histories, Jonathan had dedicated his life to exploring abandoned places and piecing together the stories they held. The legend of Drakenhof Palace had always fascinated him, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind its dark reputation. Jonathan checked into the village inn, where he was greeted with wary glances and hushed conversations. The villagers were reluctant to speak of the palace, their faces growing pale at its mention. Undeterred, Jonathan pressed on, eager to begin his investigation. He gathered his supplies and set off toward the looming silhouette of Drakenhof Palace, its spires barely visible through the thickening fog. Chapter 2. The Entrance. The path to the palace was overgrown with tangled vines and gnarled roots, as if nature itself sought to reclaim the land. Jonathan pushed forward, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he reached the grand iron gates, he was struck by the eerie silence that enveloped the place. The gates, once majestic, now hung ajar, creaking ominously in the wind. He stepped inside the courtyard, where the air was thick with decay. The once beautiful gardens were now overrun with weeds, and the fountains had long since dried up. Jonathan approached the massive wooden doors of the palace, their intricate carvings still visible despite the layers of dust and grime. With a deep breath, he pushed the doors open and stepped into the darkness within. Chapter 3. The Grand Hall. The Grand Hall of Drakenhof Palace was a sight to behold, even in its state of disrepair. Tall, arched windows lined the walls, their stained glass shattered and covered in dust. Faded tapestries depicting scenes of battle and conquest hung limply, their colors long faded. The marble floor, once polished to a gleam, was now cracked and littered with debris. Jonathan's footsteps echoed through the vast hall as he made his way toward the grand staircase. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, but whenever he turned around, he found nothing but shadows. Determined to explore further, he climbed the staircase, each step creaking under his weight. Chapter 4. The Library. At the top of the staircase, Jonathan discovered the palace's library. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with dusty tomes and scrolls. He marveled at the collection, knowing that it held centuries of knowledge and secrets. As he perused the shelves, he came across a leather-bound journal, its cover adorned with the Drakenhof family crest. Opening the journal, Jonathan began to read the entries written by Duke Friedrich himself. The journal detailed the Duke's descent into madness, driven by an insatiable thirst for power and immortality. The final entries were the most disturbing, describing dark rituals and sacrifices meant to appease malevolent spirits that the Duke had summoned. Jonathan's heart raced as he realized that the rumors about the palace were true. The spirits of those sacrificed by the Duke still lingered, bound to the palace by their torment. Chapter 5. The First Encounter. As Jonathan read the journal, he heard a faint whispering, growing louder with each passing moment. He looked up to see shadows moving along the walls, their shapes twisting and contorting. The temperature in the room dropped, and his breath became visible in the cold air. The whispers grew into anguished cries, filling the library with a cacophony of despair. Jonathan's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the room. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see a ghostly figure, its face twisted in agony. The apparition reached out with a skeletal hand, its hollow eyes filled with sorrow. Jonathan stumbled backward, dropping the journal. The ghost let out a piercing wail, and the room began to shake violently. In a panic, Jonathan fled the library, the cries of the tormented spirits echoing in his ears. He ran through the dark corridors, each one seemingly more twisted and labyrinthine than the last. The palace seemed to come alive, the walls closing in around him. He could hear footsteps behind him, growing closer with each passing second. Chapter 6. The Hidden Chamber. Jonathan stumbled upon a hidden door, partially concealed behind a tattered tapestry. He pushed it open and found himself in a narrow passageway. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and he could hear the distant drip of water. He followed the passage, his flashlight revealing ancient carvings on the walls, symbols of dark magic and forbidden rituals. The passage led to a hidden chamber, illuminated by flickering candles. The room was filled with strange artifacts, bones, chalices, and ancient scrolls. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, stained with dried blood. Jonathan realized that this was the site of the Duke's dark rituals, the place where countless souls had been sacrificed. As he examined the altar, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned to see another ghostly figure, this one more horrifying than the last. Its face was a mask of rage and sorrow, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. The ghost let out a guttural growl, and Jonathan felt an icy grip around his throat. Chapter 7. The Escape. Jonathan struggled to break free from the ghost's grip, gasping for breath. He reached for his flashlight and swung it at the apparition, which let out a shriek and released him. He stumbled backward, clutching his throat, and ran out of the chamber. The palace seemed to twist and shift around him, the walls closing in and the floor buckling beneath his feet. He could hear the ghosts pursuing him, their wails of torment echoing through the corridors. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest as he searched for a way out. He found himself in the grand hall once more, but the exit was blocked by a massive, spectral figure. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. Desperate, Jonathan remembered the journal's final entry. Duke Friedrich had written of a way to banish the spirits, a ritual that required the blood of a Drakenhof. Jonathan realized that he needed to find the Duke's tomb and complete the ritual if he hoped to escape the palace alive. Chapter 8. The Duke's Tomb. Jonathan searched the palace, evading the vengeful spirits as best he could. He found a hidden staircase leading down to the crypts where the Drakenhof family was buried. The air grew colder as he descended, the darkness pressing in around him. He could hear whispers and sobs echoing through the stone corridors. At the end of the crypt, Jonathan found the Duke's tomb. The sarcophagus was adorned with intricate carvings and the Drakenhof crest. He pushed the heavy lid aside, revealing the mummified remains of Duke Friedrich. With trembling hands, Jonathan took a dagger from the altar and cut his palm, letting his blood drip onto the Duke's remains. He began to recite the incantation from the journal, his voice shaking. The air around him grew heavy, and the ground began to tremble. The spirits wailed in fury, but Jonathan continued the ritual, his voice growing stronger. A blinding light filled the crypt, and the spirits were drawn toward the Duke's tomb, their wails growing more distant. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. As the last of the spirits were drawn into the light, the spectral figure from the grand hall appeared before Jonathan. It was Duke Friedrich himself, his face twisted in rage. The Duke's ghost lunged at Jonathan, its eyes burning with hatred. Jonathan stood his ground, holding the dagger aloft. "You will not torment this place any longer," he shouted, plunging the dagger into the ground. The light intensified, and the Duke's ghost let out a blood-curdling scream as it was pulled into the light. The crypt was filled with a blinding radiance, and Jonathan felt a rush of warmth and peace wash over him. When the light finally faded, the crypt was silent. The air was still, and the oppressive darkness had lifted. Chapter 10. The Legacy of Courage. Years passed, and Drakenhof Palace became a place of learning and inspiration. Scholars and historians from far and wide came to study its rich history, drawn by the story of Jonathan Harker and the brave villagers who had reclaimed it from the grip of darkness. The library, once a repository of forbidden knowledge, was now a treasure trove of historical records and artifacts, open to those who sought wisdom. Jonathan, now a revered figure in the community, dedicated himself to chronicling the events that had transpired. His detailed accounts served as a warning and a guide for future generations. He often spoke to the villagers and visitors about the importance of facing one's fears and the power of collective effort in overcoming adversity. Chapter 11. The Festival of Light. To honor the bravery of Jonathan and the villagers, the community established an annual Festival of Light. Each year, on the anniversary of the palace's liberation, the village was adorned with lanterns and candles. The festival was a time of celebration, reflection, and unity, reminding everyone of the darkness they had overcome and the light they had brought into the world. During the festival, the villagers would gather in the grand hall of Drakenhof Palace, where they listened to stories of courage and resilience. Children were told the tale of Jonathan Harker and the haunted palace, instilling in them a sense of bravery and hope. The festival became a cherished tradition, a beacon of light in the hearts of the villagers. Chapter 12. The Echoes of the Past. Though the palace was now a place of peace, echoes of the past still lingered. Visitors occasionally reported hearing faint whispers or seeing fleeting shadows. Some believed that the spirits of those who had been sacrificed by Duke Friedrich remained, not as vengeful ghosts, but as guardians of the palace, ensuring that it would never fall into darkness again. Jonathan, too, felt the presence of the spirits. He often visited the crypt, where he would sit in quiet contemplation, honoring the souls who had suffered and the courage that had set them free. He found solace in the belief that the spirits were at peace, their torment replaced by a sense of purpose and protection. Chapter 13. A New Threat. As time went on, a new threat emerged. A group of dark practitioners, drawn by the palace's history of dark magic, sought to reclaim the power that had once resided there. Led by a mysterious figure known only as the Sorcerer, they began to infiltrate the village, spreading fear and discord. The villagers, guided by the legacy of courage, stood united against the new threat. They formed a council, with Jonathan as their leader, to devise a plan to protect their home. The sorcerer and his followers were cunning and powerful, but the villagers had something stronger: the unbreakable bond of community and the lessons of the past. Chapter 14. The Battle for Drakenhof. The final confrontation took place in the Grand Hall of Drakenhof Palace. The sorcerer, wielding dark magic, summoned shadows and specters to aid him. The villagers, armed with their courage and the knowledge passed down from Jonathan, stood their ground. Jonathan, now an old but resolute man, faced the sorcerer. "You will not take this place from us," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. The sorcerer laughed, dismissing the old man as no threat. But Jonathan had one final card to play. With a surge of energy, Jonathan invoked the ancient ritual that had once banished Duke Friedrich's spirit. The hall was filled with a blinding light, and the shadows recoiled in terror. The sorcerer, caught off guard, was enveloped by the light, his dark powers stripped away. The villagers, bolstered by Jonathan's bravery, fought back with renewed vigor. The sorcerer's followers fled, their dark influence shattered. The light that filled the hall spread throughout the palace, purging the remnants of darkness and leaving behind a renewed sense of peace. Jonathan Harker, having fulfilled his destiny, passed away peacefully in his sleep not long after the battle. The villagers mourned the loss of their hero but celebrated the life he had lived and the legacy he had left behind. They erected a statue in his honor, a symbol of unwavering courage and the enduring power of light over darkness. Drakenhof Palace, now a place of learning, unity, and peace, continued to thrive. The Festival of Light grew in prominence, attracting visitors from distant lands who came to hear the story of Jonathan Harker and the brave villagers. The palace stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a beacon of hope and courage for all who visited. And so, the tale of the haunted palace became a legend, a story of darkness and redemption, of fear and bravery. The spirits of the past, now guardians of the light, watched over Drakenhof Palace, ensuring that it would remain a place of peace and inspiration for generations to come. The whispers of the forest, once filled with sorrow and torment, now carried the echoes of courage and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of the human spirit could shine through.
Don't forget to subscribe.